metal scraping against metal. The smell of burning rubber and racing fuel mixing with cold Florida wind. Floodlights hit the Daytona asphalt so bright that shadows look like black holes. 50,000 spectators roar, but at turn 3 there's strange silence, just heavy breathing of 3 men standing among wreckage. Cale Yarborough's helmet is off. Bobby Allison's fists are up. Between them, 7 years of accumulated rage. CBS cameras are rolling. The 1979 Daytona 500 is the first 500-mile NASCAR race broadcast flag to flag on live national TV. A snowstorm has trapped millions of Americans indoors with nothing to watch. They're about to witness the most important fistfight in motorsports history. Not because of who won, but because of what it revealed about stock car racing's soul. The punch lands at 4:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The sport will never be the same. William Caleb Yarborough arrived in this world on March 27, 1939, in Timmonsville, South Carolina, tobacco country, where the soil is red and the money is somewhere else. His father was a tobacco farmer who believed in 2 things: hard work and harder discipline. Cale grew up picking tobacco in 100-degree heat, learning that success came from outlasting everyone else. You didn't have to be the smartest. You didn't have to be the luckiest. You had to be the last man standing when the work was done. He discovered speed at Darlington Raceway, the track they called Too Tough to Tame, just 40 miles from his family's farm. Cale would sneak to the fence as a kid, watching Curtis Turner and Fireball Roberts wrestle 3,600-pound stock cars through turns banked at 25 degrees. The cars looked like they were fighting gravity itself. And Cale understood something fundamental. Racing wasn't about the machine. It was about who refused to lift when every instinct screamed to get off the throttle. By 1957, at 18, he was racing jalopies at local dirt tracks. He won by doing what nobody else would, staying flat through corners where other drivers lifted. He destroyed cars, he broke bones, he kept winning. Ford Motor Company noticed. In 1965, they hired him to test their NASCAR program at Holman Moody's shop in Charlotte. Cale wasn't just fast, he was analytical. Could feel what a car needed through his hands and backside. Could translate mechanical problems into plain English for the engineers. He won his first NASCAR race in 1965 at Valdosta, Georgia. He was 26 years old and had already decided he was going to be the greatest stock car driver who ever lived. Robert Arthur Allison was born December 3, 1937, in Miami, Florida. But his racing education happened in Hueytown, Alabama, a working-class Birmingham suburb where you fixed your own car because you couldn't afford to pay someone else. Bobby's father was a tool foreman at a construction company. The family had enough to eat, but not much more. Bobby grew up understanding that if you wanted something, you built it yourself. He started racing in 1955 at 17, at a tiny dirt track in Midfield, Alabama. He drove a 1935 Ford Coupe he'd bought for $35 and modified in his backyard with hand tools and scrap metal. The car was slow. Bobby wasn't. He won by outthinking other drivers, positioning, timing, knowing when to push and when to save the car for the end. NASCAR didn't come looking for Bobby Allison. He had to chase NASCAR. Through the late 1950s and early 1960s, he barnstormed the Southeast, racing anywhere that would pay an entry fee. Modified sportsman. Grand National. He won everywhere. He was smart enough to know that winning at places like Bowman Gray Stadium or Hickory Speedway didn't make you famous, but it made you good. And if you got good enough, fame would follow. In 1961, Bobby moved to Hueytown permanently, set up a speed shop in his garage, and started building his own race cars. He couldn't afford to hire the best mechanics, so he became the best mechanic. He studied engine theory, learned metalwork, taught himself suspension geometry. Other drivers had crews. Bobby Allison was a crew. By 1965, the same year Cale won his first race, Bobby was running full-time in NASCAR's Grand National Series. Mostly in cars he built himself. He won twice that year. He was 28 years old and had already decided he was going to be the greatest stock car driver who ever lived. Two men, same dream, same timeline, same absolute certainty that they were destined for the top. Only one problem: the top only has room for one. Bobby Allison never raced alone. By the late 1960s, he'd built something unprecedented in NASCAR, a collective. The Alabama Gang wasn't just a nickname, it was a philosophy. Bobby, his brother Donnie, and later Red Farmer and Neil Bonnet formed a tight unit that shared cars, parts, information, and track position. If one of them couldn't win, they'd work together to make sure another gang member did. This was radical. Stock car racing in the 1960s was intensely individualistic. Drivers guarded their setups like nuclear codes. The Alabama Gang operated like a racing cooperative. They tested together, shared telemetry data before telemetry was even a word people used, and coordinated strategy during races. If you raced against Bobby Allison, you raced against 4 cars, not one. Bobby's genius was organizational. He ran his operation like a business. He negotiated his own sponsorship deals, managed his own logistics, built his own engines in a shop behind his house in Hueytown. When he showed up to a track, he arrived with a complete infrastructure: backup parts, extra engines, a team that knew every nut and bolt on the car because they'd installed every nut and bolt themselves. He won the 1967 Volunteer 500 at Bristol driving a car he'd built in his garage. He won 12 races in 1971, again mostly in self-built Dodges and Mercurys. The factory teams hated him because he proved you didn't need Detroit's money to win. You just needed to be smarter and work harder than everyone else. But there was a cost. Running your own team meant Bobby controlled everything, which meant Bobby worried about everything: sponsorship, parts supply, engine reliability, travel logistics. He was driver, crew chief, team owner, and accountant. The stress was constant, and it made him defensive, prickly, quick to assume conspiracy when things went wrong. Cale Yarborough took the opposite path. In 1973, he signed with Junior Johnson's racing team, and it changed everything. Junior Johnson was a legend before he ever owned a race team. Moonshine runner from Wilkes County, North Carolina, who'd learned to drive at 13 years old, outrunning federal agents on mountain roads. He'd been one of NASCAR's greatest drivers in the 1950s and early 1960s, 50 wins, including the 1960 Daytona 500. When he retired from driving in 1966, he became an owner, and he brought Moonshiner's cunning to the technical side of racing. Junior understood something other owners didn't. NASCAR was an engineering war disguised as a driving contest. Rules were written in language that left loopholes. Loopholes were opportunities. Junior hired the best engine builders, the smartest fabricators, the most creative rule interpreters. His cars were always fast, and they were always legal, technically. NASCAR inspectors would tear down a Junior Johnson engine and find nothing explicitly illegal, just 100 small innovations that added up to a massive advantage. When Cale joined Junior's team, he got something Bobby Allison never had: freedom. Cale didn't worry about parts or sponsors or logistics, he just drove. Junior gave him the fastest cars on the circuit, and Cale proved he was the fastest driver. They won the championship in 1976. Then 1977, then 1978. 3 consecutive titles. 9 wins in 76, 9 in 77, 10 in 78. Cale Yarborough wasn't just winning. He was dominant in a way NASCAR hadn't seen since Richard Petty's peak. And he did it while Bobby Allison was still grinding, still building engines in Hueytown, still fighting for every sponsorship dollar. The resentment was mutual. Cale thought Bobby was a whiner who blamed everyone else when his self-built cars broke down. Bobby thought Cale was a factory pretty boy who'd never had to struggle, who didn't understand what real racers sacrificed. Both were wrong, both were right, neither cared. Racing feuds need incidents to crystallize. Cale and Bobby provided plenty. May 1977, Dover Downs International Speedway. Bobby is running second behind Cale with 20 laps to go. Going into turn 3, Bobby dives low, trying to take the lead. Cale comes down to block. Sheet metal touches. Bobby's Matador gets loose, hits the wall, finishes 8th. After the race, Bobby accuses Cale of deliberately wrecking him. Cale says Bobby drove over his head. The accusations get personal. Bobby calls Cale Junior's puppet. Cale calls Bobby a garage mechanic playing racer. September 1977, Martinsville Speedway. Bobby and Cale are battling for 3rd place. Coming out of turn 2, Cale's Chevrolet and Bobby's Matador make contact. Both cars spin. Both hit the wall. Both drivers climb out furious. They have to be separated by crew members. NASCAR officials issue warnings. Nothing changes. February 1978, Daytona 500. Bobby is leading with 3 laps to go. Cale is second. On the backstretch, Cale pulls alongside, but Bobby won't give an inch. They run side by side at 190 miles per hour, neither lifting. Going into turn 3, Cale tries to force his way past. The cars touch. Cale's Oldsmobile gets sideways, loses momentum, finishes second. Bobby wins. In victory lane, Bobby says, "Some people race you clean. Some people try to move you. I don't move." Cale says nothing. He doesn't forget. The hatred wasn't just about racing incidents. It was philosophical. Bobby believed racing was about preparation, intelligence, outthinking your opponent. If you showed up with a better car and a smarter strategy, you deserved to win. Cale believed racing was about courage and commitment. The guy who refused to lift, who took risks nobody else would take, deserved to win. Bobby thought Cale was reckless. Cale thought Bobby was scared. On short tracks, Bristol, Martinsville, North Wilkesboro, they wrecked each other so often that NASCAR officials started watching them specifically. Spotters would radio warnings. "Cale's behind you, watch the bumper." Or, "Bobby's coming, he's mad about rocking him." Other drivers stayed out of the way. Richard Petty, the sport's elder statesman, said later, "When Cale and Bobby were near each other, you gave them room. It wasn't racing anymore, it was personal." By early 1979, they'd been battling for 7 years. Cale had 3 championships. Bobby had none. Though he'd won 83 races, more than anyone in the modern era except Petty, Cale was NASCAR's golden boy, the champion. Bobby was NASCAR's workingman hero, beloved by fans, but never quite getting the respect he thought he deserved. The 1979 Daytona 500 was supposed to settle it. NASCAR had been trying to get a 500-mile race on national television for 20 years. The sport was huge in the South, invisible everywhere else. Northerners thought stock car racing was rednecks driving in circles. Networks thought it was too regional, too long, too boring for national broadcast. CBS Sports finally agreed to broadcast the 1979 Daytona 500 live, start to finish. This was unprecedented. The Super Bowl got live coverage, the World Series, the Kentucky Derby. But a stock car race. CBS executives were gambling that Americans would sit through 3.5 hours of cars going around an oval. Then the snowstorm hit. The blizzard of 1979 dumped snow from Georgia to Maine. Washington, D.C. got 18 inches. New York got 20. Boston got 27. Interstate 95 was closed for 3 days. Airports shut down. 50 million Americans were trapped indoors with nothing to do. And CBS was broadcasting a race from sunny Florida. The ratings were massive from the start. People tuned in because there was literally nothing else on TV. What they saw was stock car racing at its absolute peak. Allison and Cale Yarborough battled for the lead for most of the race, swapping positions lap after lap. Allison ran in the top 5, occasionally dropping back to third but always staying close. By lap 170, it was a 2-car race. Cale and Donnie separated by inches, running 190 miles per hour inches apart. The leaders lapped the entire field. Even third place, Jay Foyt, one of the greatest drivers in American motorsports history, was half a lap behind. Darrell Waltrip and Richard Petty were running 4th and 5th, a lap down, watching the leaders disappear. Cale tried everything. He tried to outbrake Donnie going into turn 1. He tried to get a run on the backstretch. He tried to dive underneath in turn 3. Donnie blocked every move. They'd been teammates in the past, but there was no mercy here. Allison wanted to win the Daytona 500 as badly as Cale did. Lap 195, 5 laps to go. Cale pulls alongside Donnie on the backstretch. They're running side by side at 195 miles per hour. Neither driver lifts. They go into turn 3 still side by side. This is where physics gets involved. 2 cars running that close at that speed create aerodynamic turbulence. The air between them acts like a cushion, pushing them apart. Cale's car gets loose. The rear end starts to slide. He corrects, but he's now slightly sideways. Donnie's car gets pushed high by the turbulence. They touch, not hard, just sheet metal against sheet metal. But at 195 miles per hour, a touch is enough. Cale's car spins left. Donnie's car spins right. They slide across the track in opposite directions, both drivers fighting the wheel. Cale's Oldsmobile hits the outside wall. Donnie's Oldsmobile hits the inside wall. Both cars ricochet back onto the racing surface in the middle of turn 3, smoking and destroyed. Behind them, Richard Petty and Darrell Waltrip, still a lap down, suddenly inherit the lead. The wreck happened on lap 196. Petty and Waltrip have 4 laps to race for the win. On fresh tires, running unopposed, they'll set the fastest laps of the entire race. But CBS cameras don't follow them. The cameras stay on turn 3, where Cale Yarborough is climbing out of his destroyed Oldsmobile, where Allison is still strapped in his crumpled car, dazed, and where Allison has stopped his perfectly functional race car to check on his brother. Bobby climbs out. He sees Donnie's car, sees his brother slumped in the seat, and runs over. Donnie is okay, shaken up, angry, but okay. Bobby asks what happened. Donnie says Cale wrecked him. Cale walks over. His helmet is off. He's furious. He says Donnie blocked him, wouldn't give him room, caused the wreck. Bobby says, "You wrecked my brother." Cale says, "Your brother wrecked himself." Bobby steps closer. Cale doesn't back up. They're 6 inches apart, yelling. Bobby is 41 years old. Cale is 39. Both are professional athletes in peak condition. Both have been hitting each other's cars for 7 years. Both have been wanting to hit each other personally for just as long. Bobby shoves Cale. Cale shoves back. Donnie climbs out of his car, still wearing his helmet, and grabs Cale from behind. Cale swings. The punch connects with Bobby's helmet. Cale immediately regrets this because punching a helmet hurts. Bobby swings back. Cale ducks. Donnie has Cale in a headlock. Cale is trying to fight both Allisons at once. It's not a graceful fight. It's not choreographed. It's 3 exhausted, furious men throwing wild punches in the middle of a racetrack, surrounded by wrecked cars and oil smoke. And CBS is broadcasting every second to 50 million Americans. The fight lasts maybe 30 seconds before crew members pull them apart. NASCAR officials arrive, the drivers are separated, warned, sent to their haulers. Nobody is injured beyond bruised knuckles and damaged pride. On the track, Richard Petty crosses the finish line to win his 6th Daytona 500. It's one of the biggest wins of his career. Nobody remembers it. Everyone remembers the fight. CBS replayed the footage immediately. Then again during the post-race coverage. Then again on the evening news. By Monday morning, the fight had been replayed on every major network. Sports Illustrated ran a photo spread. Newspapers across the country ran the story on the front page of the sports section. 50 million people had watched the race because of a snowstorm. They saw incredible racing. Two drivers battling door-to-door at 195 miles per hour for 195 laps. And they saw a fistfight that confirmed every stereotype about stock car racing. These were tough, aggressive men who settled their disputes physically. But here's what nobody expected. America loved it. NASCAR's attendance exploded. The 1979 season saw a 30% increase in ticket sales. Tracks that had struggled to sell out suddenly had waiting lists. TV networks started bidding for broadcast rights. Sponsorship money flooded in. By 1980, NASCAR had transformed from a regional sport to a national phenomenon. The Cale-Bobby feud was central to that growth. Fans picked sides. You were either Team Yarborough, the smooth, talented champion backed by factory money, or Team Allison, the working-class hero who built his own cars and refused to back down. NASCAR wisely did almost nothing to stop the feud. Officials would issue warnings after particularly egregious incidents, but they understood what they had. A genuine rivalry that wasn't manufactured for TV, wasn't hyped by marketing departments. This was real hatred between two incredibly talented drivers, and it sold tickets. Cale and Bobby kept racing. They kept wrecking each other. Bobby finally won his championship in 1983, driving for Daytona Racing. He was 45 years old, one of the oldest first-time champions in NASCAR history. He'd been trying for 28 years. Cale retired in 1988 with 83 wins and 3 championships. Bobby retired in 1988 with 84 wins and 1 championship. Even their final tallies were competitive. Years later, both men softened. Cale admitted he'd been too aggressive sometimes. Bobby admitted he'd held grudges too long. They appeared together at NASCAR events, signed autographs side by side, even laughed about the Daytona fight. But the reconciliation was incomplete. When asked directly if they were friends, both men would pause, choose their words carefully, say something diplomatic about mutual respect. They never said they were friends, because they weren't. They were rivals who happened to stop competing. The hatred had faded to indifference, but the fundamental incompatibility remained. Cale still thought Bobby was too rigid, too political. Bobby still thought Cale had been given advantages he never earned. The 1979 Daytona 500 is called the race that changed everything, and it's not hyperbole. Before that race, NASCAR was a regional curiosity. After that race, it was a national sport. The snowstorm brought the audience. The racing kept them watching. The fight made them come back. But here's what gets forgotten. The Cale-Bobby feud was 7 years old when the fight happened. They'd been building toward that moment since 1972, accumulating grievances, trading paint, wrecking each other on short tracks in front of a few thousand fans. The Daytona fight wasn't an isolated incident. It was the climax of a long, bitter rivalry that had been building in obscurity. If not for the snowstorm, if not for CBS's cameras, nobody outside NASCAR's hardcore fan base would have seen it. The rivalry would have burned just as hot, but it would have happened in the shadows. Instead, it happened on national television, and it revealed something about stock car racing that changed the sport forever. NASCAR wasn't about machines. It was about personalities. It was about feuds and redemption and working-class heroes fighting factory-backed champions. It was drama at 200 miles per hour. Modern NASCAR owes its existence to a lot of factors. Bill France's promotional genius, Detroit's factory backing, television coverage, corporate sponsorship. But The 1979 Daytona 500 was the inflection point, the moment when NASCAR became something bigger than a regional racing series. And that moment happened because two men from the South, one from tobacco country in South Carolina, one from a working-class suburb in Alabama, hated each other so completely, so genuinely, that they couldn't let a crash pass without throwing punches. Cale Yarborough is in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Bobby Allison is in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. The 1979 Daytona 500 is in the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing's official list of the most important races in the sport's history. The fight is what everyone remembers, but the fight was just one punch in a 7-year war. And that war, that genuine, unscripted, deeply personal hatred between two of the greatest drivers who ever lived, is what turned NASCAR from a niche sport into an American institution. They never meant to save NASCAR. They were just trying to beat each other. But sometimes history doesn't care about intentions. Sometimes history just needs a snowstorm, a camera, and two men who refuse to back down.